everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
In this video, I'm going to teach you guys how to do a one-liner tag in Graffiti. And we're going to begin by explaining how one-liners function, a few do's and do-nots, a few tips and tricks if you will, and then we'll teach some fundamental tools that are used to actually build one-liners. And on top of that, we're going to be breaking down some amazing one-liner tags from other graffiti artists. That way you can see how these fundamental tools are applied by different graffiti artists and how they use them. And we'll use those tools to build our own one-liner. Be sure to use the chapters to skip to different parts that you might want to see, especially if you're coming back to watch this video after you've already seen it once before. Now for this tutorial, I went ahead and asked D-mark, one of the best one-liner graffiti artists I've seen in the game, period. What are some tips that you have for people trying to get into one-liners? And I'll be honest, man, this guy gave me a tip that I was not expecting, but it's probably the best tip in this video. And that is, learn the basics. Learn your letter structures. Learn those fundamentals. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do a one-liner. Just check this dude's one-liners out, just so you can see how good the stuff he does is, and how effortless it comes to him. So let's hop right into this thing by explaining a bit about one-liners. One-liners in graffiti are very similar and very derivative of cursive and how cursive functions. It takes a lot of those same ideas and implements them into different letter structures. So in cursive, we have letters that are specifically built and specifically tuned to take a singular line and flow from one letter into the next to make a whole word. Now, when you're doing cursive, we have our letter structure, as you see right here, and then we have what's called a connecting line. And there's various different kinds of connecting lines, especially for graffiti, where we have a lot more leniency with our connecting lines. But what we want to understand about the connecting line is that it's an extension. And the reason this is important to understand is because it follows the same anatomy and the same fundamentals as all other extensions, which if you aren't familiar with extensions, we made a tutorial about it right down here. You can go ahead and check out. It'll also be linked in the cards above. But to give you the short of it, extensions follow a formula, and they have an anatomy to them. They have an origin, a travel distance, and a destination. And for the formula of an extension, you want to flow out of your origin, you want to have a reason for the travel distance, and you want to flow at the destination. Cursive builds its letter structures specifically to fulfill just about all three of those functions. The letter structure allows the connecting line to flow out of the origin. The reason for the travel distance is to seamlessly connect into the second letter in order to speed up your writing process. And then the next letter allows the connecting line to flow back into the destination. And there's a few different kinds of connecting lines that we can use. The most common being the hairpin curve. It gets its name because the actual curve kind of just looks like a hairpin. And this one's great because not only does it maintain momentum, allowing you to seamlessly and very quickly go from one letter to the next, it's also very adaptable and very hidden, oftentimes going completely unseen, especially in graffiti where our nibs might be fatter. One of the best utilities of this though is that hairpin curves are able to double back on themselves or go in completely different directions, allowing you to reach from one letter to the next very easily. But a connecting line doesn't have to be a hairpin curve. We can also just simply finish one structure and continue the line from that structure directly into the next structure without ever creating a hairpin curve. We can also do more obvious things that aren't as subtle, and this could potentially work for your hand styles or other graffiti as well, where perhaps we just change direction completely from our original letter and we go directly into the second letter. There is a time and a place for that, and while it might look abrupt, and it certainly isn't well disguised in a lot of cases, there's times where it doesn't have to be. And then of course we can always just do what you commonly might see on the letter O, where we draw just a big loop. This is great not only for redirecting momentum, but also for maintaining your flow in general. But there's a few things that we don't want to do. We don't really want to cross through our structures. And if we do, we have to be very careful with how we do that. The reason we want to avoid crossing through our structures is because this oftentimes makes an area look more cluttered and can completely destroy your letter structure. In some cases, especially in a lot of newer graffiti artists, your connecting line could end up just crossing yourself out. So when possible, we want to avoid blatant crossovers like this. But there is a way to pull that off, and we'll be taking a look at that later in the video. Now, if you guys want more information about this topic, check out our book that we came out with in the description down below. We have ebooks over on the online shop, theartistblock.inc, with physical copies over on Amazon. It'll teach you how connecting lines work with a lot more depth, and it'll teach you a lot more than that. You'll learn all of graffiti's fundamentals. That way, you can take a lot of the frustration and guesswork out of learning this amazing art form. Pick it up in the description down below. So what are some properties for our connecting line? Let's say we're beginning our connecting line on the right-hand side. So our letter structure ends on the right-hand side. We're stopped right there. Now it's time to shoot over to the next letter. Well, if we're starting on the right-hand side and we're connecting to the left of the next letter, this is like the best case scenario because it means that we have a really shortened travel distance. Our connecting line doesn't have to go all that far, and as a result, we minimize how much structure we're going to interfere with. This also provides us with a great opportunity for a very seamless connection connecting line. But if we're ending our letter structure on the right and we're trying to connect to the next letter anywhere on the right, now we have to go through a little bit of letter structure to get to that right hand side. It's here where we see a lot of artists take a roundabout way where they might literally draw a more boxed structure going around the top of that second letter. That way our connecting line can actually reach to the right hand side without interfering with letter structure. This creates a massive travel distance for our connecting line, but to compensate, the reason for that travel distance is to avoid disrupting letter structure. And assuming that connecting is appropriate for your graffiti, then that's enough of a reason to have that kind of a connecting line, especially if you already have flow with other parts of your letters. Now, if you're ending on the left-hand side of your letter, let's say for example the letter B, and now you have to connect to the left of the next letter, well, now you're gonna have to cross your connecting line through that first letter. But if our destination is in the middle or the top, well, suddenly now our connecting line has to go from the bottom left of our first letter to the center or the top of the second letter, and that could prove to be a lot more difficult. And this is even more emphasized if we have to connect from the left of our first letter with our destination on the right of our second letter, because now we have to cross through two letters to get from the origin to the destination. It's here where we see a lot of graffiti artists get very creative with their connecting line. They might do a rather large flourish, or really experienced artists would even find a way to double back, tracing over previous lines when they can to hide a lot of that travel distance. This isn't something that's always going to be practical, but when applicable, it definitely helps. You see, the whole point behind connecting is to maintain flow and to increase speed, but there's times where we just simply don't need to. Sometimes just writing the letters separately ends up actually being faster. If speed is your motive, of course. And if speed isn't your motive and it's more of a stylistic thing, well, there's also some times where adding these connecting lines and connecting letters just ends up being more contrived. It ends up being shoehorned and doesn't really fit and decreases your flow overall, and can even decrease other fundamentals as well, and oftentimes does. Keep in mind that also kind of gets rid of our reason for the travel distance if we don't really need to connect our letters. So before you connect anything, just make sure that your graffiti can actually benefit from connecting or being a one-liner. Let's look at a few examples of some amazing one-liner tags. We have one from Gorey, who's somebody's work I really enjoy. I think they have great stuff. I'll have the people I can find, I'll have them linked in the description down below. So in this example, Gorey's going from the center left of the G, and he's shooting to the bottom left of the O. As a result, he's got a pretty reasonable travel distance to get to, and it requires a few things. Because Gorey is using a straight line to go from the center left to the bottom left, it means that his O has to be raised up slightly. That way the bottom of his O is level with the center of his G. Now what's interesting is he really didn't have to raise the O all that much, and with an arced baseline like he has, it actually doesn't look raised much at all. A very clean way to go about that. From there, he also needs a lot of negative space around the connecting line as it passes through the G. And the reason you want this kind of negative space is that way our connecting line doesn't interfere with the actual letter structure. People are able to mentally see, alright, that's a letter G, this extra horizontal line here must be an extension of some kind. So having ample amounts of negative space around connecting lines that feed through your letter structure is really helpful. And it's because of this negative space that he then has to enlarge the G, which gives him the opportunity to then raise the O up to the center of the G. So he feeds the connecting line into the O goes through a swirl, creates its own structure. From there, the R goes down to make the stem, and then goes for a hairpin turn that we can see at the bottom there to create its own bowl. A creative connection happens right here though, where he goes through the leg of the R, and the structure technically ends at the baseline, right about here, meaning that the rest of this piece right here would be the connecting line for the Y. It then shoots up into the very top of the Y, where then he comes right back down and around for the E. Technically, this section right here between the E and the Y would be the connecting line. The E finishes at the very top, and then this little squiggle line right there, very tiny connection, is the connecting line between those two letters. Next up, we actually have a Throwie. That's a one-liner that I thought was a great example of some of the things that we had talked about here. It really shows that you can do any form of graffiti as a one-liner, though as you kind of go up the ranks in graffiti from hairstyles, throwaways to pieces, things become a little bit more intricate and a little bit more difficult. But all the fundamentals still stay the same. All the properties we previously talked about stays the same. So we have Loon here that begins with the hook of the L, draws the actual horizontal piece, comes down, and then back around to the top of the L, where at this point the letter structure is complete. He does something really clever here, and he makes sure that his letter positioning is highly overlapped. This is something that's already common for Throwies, but you still do need ample positive space within your letter structures. That way the lines that make up one letter don't interfere with the lines that make up another. So with enough positive space within the stem of the L, he's able to begin the left-hand side of the O immediately without any connecting line. He follows through with the O structure, going to the bottom of the O, where then what do you see? A hairpin curve that leads directly directly into the next O. Now his first O already has quite a bit of overlaps, which means that there's already some kind of build-up of this line work taking place. He has to be careful with the execution of his second O. Beginning at the bottom from the connecting line, he begins the structure of the O at the right-hand side, shooting up to the left, back towards the L, and then back down towards the bottom of the O. Once again, going directly with no connecting line into the bottom of the N. Because these lines flow so seamlessly from one to the next, he doesn't need a connecting line in this instance. He's able to flow his momentum between the two letters. So at that point, he continues the N, goes around to the top, and it's here where he honestly could have stopped the Throwie, but he takes things a step further, and he decides to put the close counters for the O, utilizing a hairpin curve to actually create the close counter itself. Now, the connecting line between both close counters does kind of add a little bit of congestion with the line work in that area, but he has enough positive space built up to where he can sacrifice just a little bit, and the letters are simplistic enough to where we can still make out the name, so everything is all good and set and ready to go. Not that Loon did a bad job, but a much smoother example is one we see right here from Metal. This truly is a prime example of a one-liner Throwie. None of the letter structures are really hindered at all whatsoever, and his connecting lines are very non-intrusive. So he begins with the right-hand side of the M, going for the center here, going around to the left-hand side, creating the left leg of the M, and feeding directly into the center. Now sure, he might have started this second line at the top right of the M, or he could just trace right down the center of that M to begin the right-hand side. So he finishes the right-hand side of the M, hairpin curves directly into the capital E, feeding into the bottom of the structure, then creating each horizontal section for the letter E, tracing back over the line as he goes for those horizontal lines. At that point, we end up at the top of the E, which then just curves directly into the top of the T, and he's able to complete that entire structure, and then once he gets to the bottom, hairpin curve into the A. Finish the structure of the A, going all the way to the top, hairpin curve directly into the L. Seamless transition from one letter into the next, and a really effective way to go about things. Now for D-mark, he's got some wild one-liners. He does full-fledged pieces with a simple line, and normally he'll begin the structure in one area, do most of it, and then use his connecting line to redirect in a slightly or totally different direction and complete the structure while traveling to the next letter. We see him do that not only with the A here at the bottom, and then as he goes around the A for the connecting line, he actually just kind of builds a little bit of a outline around his initial structure. He does this from letter to letter in order to continue things and keep things one line. Other times he'll finish the letter and his connecting line will create a square, a little box around the letter. That way it can reach whatever part he needs to reach next for the subsequent letter. So how might we create our own one-liner? Well, we're gonna do things a lot more simplistic than D-mark, Gorey, and the other guys that we looked at, because we're just learning, right? We want to take things slow. Now for this example, we're actually going to use the word one, because a lot of people like to put one or oneer at the end of their name, so I figure it's something that a lot of you guys can actually utilize. And it's also a fairly simple one that should show a lot of these points really well. So first things first, we want to know what structures we're going to be using for the hand style, and we want to do that hand style, whatever it might be, without anything connecting. And the reason we want to begin in this way is that way we can get a clear understanding of where our origin is going to begin and where our connecting line is going to have to reach to. So here on the O, I ended at the top. For a capital N, I'd have to come back down to the bottom. And we decided on a lowercase e, which begins in the center. So now I look at these three letters and I think, all right, I know I'm ending at the top of the O. How do I get to the bottom of the N? Or is there a way I can kind of do this differently? Well, it turns out we can use one of the methods of connecting lines that we talked about previously, where we trace back over our structure. A vertical line is really easy to trace back over. So I can actually begin at the top left of the N, draw a straight line down, then trace the line back up and continue the structure as normal, allowing the connecting line essentially to feed directly into the structure with no obstruction. With the N to E combo, we're ending at the top right of the N, and we have to go to the center of the lowercase e. And there's many ways we can do this. We can hairpin curve at the top of the N and go directly into the E, or we can trace back down the vertical of the N to go into the center of the E. Well, there's countless different ways we can do this. Depending on how we do the N, we might even just straight up curve right into the E without any issue, or we can even shorten the right hand side of the N. That way it ends close enough to the E, allowing for a pretty seamless transition into that letter. And any of these would work. If we were doing a capital E, something I've seen a lot of people do is they'll actually create a straight line from the top of the N all the way to the top right of the capital E, and then they'll just go into the variant structure E in that direction. Let's try another name. We're going to use the name Smog, for example. The letter S is really adaptable because we can really begin at the top or the bottom, whatever we're more comfortable with and whatever works best for our one-liner. If you find that your next letter, like let's say a lowercase m, begins at the top, well then you can begin your S at the bottom, allowing you to finish your S at the top and directly feed into the lowercase m. Let's say you are doing a capital M, which starts at the bottom. Well, you can just start your S at the top and finish the S at the bottom and directly hairpin curve or loop into the bottom of the M. O has to be one of the easiest letters to do a one-liner with because it's one big loop. So you could pretty much start at the bottom, top, middle, it doesn't matter. And then you could end at the bottom, top, middle, and it once again doesn't much matter. And for the O, we have countless ways to detach from this letter. We're ending at the top in this example, but we really could end anywhere, it wouldn't make a difference. But we need to get to the top right of the G. And because the O is so lenient, we can do this in any way we want. We can just start at the top of the O and shoot directly over to the G. That's certainly pretty seamless. There's a million different ways you can go about this. But the key things you want to keep in mind is your letter structures come first. You want to have those planned, you want to have an idea of what you're going to do before you do it. And then plan out your connecting lines from there. Remember, connecting your letters is not always necessary and it's not always practical. So you don't always have to do it. Don't force connections where you don't really need them. Always keep that at the forefront. And if you do, you should be perfectly fine with your one-liners and your connecting lines and all that good stuff. But dudes, let me know any thoughts you guys have in the comments down below. Who are some of your favorite one-liner graffiti artists? And if you guys want to learn a lot more about this topic and how it works, check out our new book in the description down below. We have digital copies of the book on our online store, theartistblock.inc, with physical copies over on Amazon. I got a link to those in the description down below, and if you want to check out the best how to do graffiti tutorials anywhere online, we got them right up here with more graffiti content right down here. And I'll catch you guys back here next week. Thanks for watching.